get into the subject matter, I just wanted to welcome you all to the first workshop in a series that I'm pretty sure will have subsequently better workshops. Uh, and I'm quite honored to be leading the first workshop within South India Pre-ABP. I'm a member of the ADG Core. Also, props to OC for organizing this because I often appreciate it when OPCOMs put in effort to conduct these workshop sessions. They often add a lot of value learning wise. Cool. So the topic at hand is debating criminal justice. And before we begin, I just had a few caveats that I wanted to share, just so that we are on the same page. The first caveat is quite obvious, and I'm pretty sure all of you know this. But there are multiple other high quality resources for studying the criminal justice system. Some of the ones that I do recommend are A, Harvard Law Review, B, good quality legal articles from The Economist, and C, Ryan Lafferty's videos. He has an awesome video on the criminal justice system, but also his matter file is quite utile. So ensure that you do check out these things as well. Just ensure that you don't constrict your understanding of the CJS to this workshop alone. The second caveat is just that I am a law student and I have baseline familiarity with most legal concepts surrounding the CJS. However, I'm not and I do not claim to be a professional jurist yet. And thus, most of this workshop will be centered around the application of these principles within the ambit of varsity debate and not necessarily a detailed study of the subject matter itself. Like the logic behind this is just that principles within the CJS are very nuanced and broad. Thus, it's pragmatically impossible for us to cover each and everything within the 60 to 90 minutes that we have been allocated. The third caveat is just that I don't like giving lectures, plus, they're often boring and monotonous. So, you'll derive maximal benefit if you keep this workshop as interactive as possible. With that said, I've broken this workshop down into two bits broadly. The first is just stuff that you should know about the criminal justice system, stuff that is extremely useful in debates. There are four parts to this. The first is understanding the purpose of the CJS. The second is understanding principles that govern it. And the second subsequent part is understanding the trial process. The third is understanding how life in prison is. Is it bad? Why is it bad? Can it be improved? And the fourth is just understanding what life after prison looks like. These are the four basic tenets of stuff that you should know about the criminal justice system before you jump into debate. And the second part of the workshop will just be direct application, which is if you know all this stuff, how do you make use of this stuff when you're given an actual motion within 15 minutes or 30 minutes, depending on the format that is in front of you. Okay, let's just jump directly into stuff that you should know. So the way in which I have structured this workshop is that I haven't written down the explanation for each and everything on screen, which is why I would expect a lot of it, like a lot of explanation to come from your side itself because of how intuitive it is. And you'll soon realize why it's so intuitive. So, getting into the purpose and principles of the criminal justice system, the first is just utility, which is pragmatism. And within utility, I think the first thing that we often think about when we try to decipher what the purpose for the CJS would be is just protecting the public or ensuring that the public feels safe enough. The first concept that you must know under protecting the public is incarceration, which is basically jailing people, putting people in jail. So the first question at hand is, why is there a need to jail people? Can somebody like volunteer and explain? This is quite an intuitive answer, but why would you need to jail people?
To bar them to commit future crimes is probably one of the reasons.
Excellent. To ensure that they do not have an ability to commit future crimes. What else? Anything else?
To deter from future crimes.
Yep, to deter these people from future crimes. If you think
Oh,
about all your answers, yeah, did anyone have anything to say?
victim catharsis.
Excellent. Victim catharsis. Yes. Putting people in jail is quite cathartic for victims who were perpetrated. If you think about all these things and all the answers that you are giving, oftentimes the core reason why you end up putting somebody in jail is because they have committed a crime. And there are multiple reasons as to why a person who has committed a crime is likely to commit a crime again. Can someone think of reasons as to why people who are already criminals, what are potential reasons as to why they're likely to commit crimes again?
They cannot properly blend into the society because society don't accept them afterward.
Excellent. Oftentimes, when you are already a criminal, there is stigma attached with you. Thus, people don't easily accept you into everyday life. Thus, you're very likely to resort to criminal circles again. What else?
You probably do not have like material access to a lot of things, so you continue to participate in criminal networks to sustain yourself.
Excellent. You often have a deficit of things like good economic conditions. What
Once
also,
you get into, so sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, once you get into criminal networks, it's difficult to get out.
Precisely. So you obviously lack economic conditions, good economic conditions rather. You lack education. But often when you get into criminal networks is often it's often difficult to leave because of how coercive these networks are. What are other reasons?
Since some committing a lot of crimes require a lot of already like have you believing that you are actually doing good and not doing anything wrong, so probably you assume that you are being treated unfairly, so you probably assume that you are like a word is like kind of against you.
Excellent. People who do commit crimes often or on a recurring basis often develop this as a pattern of behavior wherein they think it's psychologically okay for them to continue doing what they're doing because probably the state wronged them or because it's the state's fault that they don't have good economic conditions or good education. So they often villainize others and thus they internally think that it's justified for them to resort to lives of crime. The last reason, if I can pitch in and add this, is that when these people do not get jailed, they often think that there is a perceived lack of consequences. Because if these people are committing crime and are not being jailed, it's often quite convenient for these people to think that they can continue doing what they're doing without any meaningful consequences. If you think about this, all these reasons are reasons as to why people who have done crime once are likely to commit a crime again. Which is why, to ensure that this doesn't happen, you have a need for incarceration or putting people in jail. The reason as to why you put people in jail is to circumvent all these reasons. Because if these people are not jailed and are allowed to coexist in society, because of these five reasons, they will commit a crime again. Does this make sense? Can someone unmute?
Yeah, yeah. Also, I think another reason is rehabilitation properly did not happen in the when he was in the jail.
Yep, yep. We'll discuss rehab separately, but that's right. The first purpose under the criminal justice system, under utility, is jailing people. The second is what someone said earlier, which is deterrence. What does deterrence mean? Can someone explain? What does it mean to deter
If there
someone?
if there is a fear of consequences, then people are unlikely to commit the crime. Like for example, if I know that okay, I'm going to be jailed, or if my social security or social uh, like whatever standing I have in the society is going to be reduced just because I commit a crime, then I'm much less likely to commit the crime in the future. Or
Excellent.
even if I'm not a criminal, I won't do it.
Precisely. For both criminals and people who are not criminals, deterrence acts as a fear vector, wherein an explicit punishment tells them that it's not permissible for them to do a crime because if they do it, they'll face consequences. Thus, deterrence is basically a stick mechanism, a fear mechanism that ensures that people don't commit crime. The question at hand is, does deterrence work or does it not work? In debates, we often need to give reasons for both sides. So let's just give or think of reasons as to why deterrence works. Can somebody give me very first principle reasons as to why strong punishment actually stops people from committing crime? Why is this the case?
Um, there might be a fear of social rejection or social stigma. Secondly, there is a fear of your economic standing going out, that you won't be able to, cope up economically. Then there is a fear probably of the real physical harm. For example, if you are in jail, you won't get good food or you might get capital punishment. So that might be one of the reasons.
Excellent. Life in jail sucks. It's terrible. People know this perceptually. The second reason is often that multiple people, or most people rather, are rational individuals, which means they do a weighing of choices. This means they will often calculate, is the punishment more severe than the benefit that I will get out of the crime? And if the punishment is more severe on weighing, most people will be deterred and they won't do the crime because they realize that getting caught is just far worse. Thus, upon the premise that most people are rational individuals, they do this weighing and they don't commit the crime in the first place. Is there another reason as to why deterrence works?
It can also be life after jail that if you're caught and you serve a term in prison, then once you come back, you know you're not going to be accepted easily into society. So the normal life which you're living right now, you will not get it again after you come back. So if you have that thought in mind, you would likely be deterred from going ahead and committing a crime.
True, deterrence doesn't just extend to people who have not become criminals, but also extends to people who have been criminals once, have been jailed, and thus they viscerally see the harm of their crime, and thus they don't repeat the crime again after they've been jailed. Cool. More about people who haven't become criminals. What is another reason as to why they're meaningfully deterred as a consequence of you having strong punishment?
It is because it's a huge loss of rights. You can't move freely. You can't do anything that you want once you're in jail, and they don't
True.
like that.
True. Again, assumes that people are rational, assumes that they weigh choices rationally. Another reason that I can think of is that often deterrence trickles down to kids, which is if there is an explicit punishment on a crime like theft, shoplifting, hurting others, it's often socialized through schools, wherein your parents and teachers tell you that this is wrong to do and you will be punished if you do this. Thus, this socialization of deterrence happens at a very early age. Thus, the agency that kids do end up developing regarding their mindset as to how they view crime is often taught to them at a very, very early age, which is why these kids never resort to criminal tendencies in the first place. So, you often target them young and you often teach them that you ought to be deterred by these punishments early on. Thus, it's part of their internal psyche because this often happens in like schools by virtue of teachers and parents. This is another reason to explain why deterrence works. I honestly believe that deterrence in most instances does not work. Uh, can someone give reasons as to why it doesn't work?
I think one major reason could be essentially even if you have high amount of jail time for specific crimes, if you do not have enforcements, the crime will still occur because people can see that they can get away with it easily or much more easily.
Exactly. That's actually a brilliant answer because the reason as to why most people don't get deterred is because they don't think they'll be caught. Most criminals are not rational individuals, and they have what you call an optimism bias, which is these people often think that other criminals do get caught because they have a skill issue. I won't be caught because I'm a skilled criminal. So oftentimes most criminals operate with the mindset that they won't be caught, or they're often tied with the law enforcement on ground, which is often corrupt, which means they think that they can get away by bribing the local policemen or things like that, which is why they often don't necessarily think that just because a punishment exists, that will trickle down to them being jailed. So the way in which deterrence works is whether you actually perceive being caught or not. Most criminals think that they won't be caught because they're optimistically biased, but also because the law enforcement often is corrupt. And it's corrupt because they're often very underpaid. And this is an easy opportunity to make cash for them. Thus, most criminals don't even think that they will be caught. What's another reason as to why deterrence doesn't work?
For some crimes, like not for all, but maybe for some crimes like road raging, or maybe some fights on the streets or something where you just people do it in a fit of rage. Maybe at that moment when we are doing the stuff, they are not rational enough.
Excellent. A lot of crimes happen by virtue of you being impulsive, which is it happens in the fit of the movement. You are in a situation, I don't know, your hormones are on the rise, it's fight or flight instinct kicking in. You often don't do a very rational evaluation of whether what you're doing is logical or not. Thus, you end up acting in impulsive ways and you don't think about the consequences enough, which means, sure, there's a punishment on the crime, but you don't have the rational space or the rational ambit to analyze whether you should do this or not. Thus, you act impulsively. Thus, deterrence doesn't work. What's another reason as to why deterrence doesn't work?
On terms of just scale or like to like for pure numbers, even if you like go ahead and make as much deterrence as possible, at most it will only work 99.99% times, and some people will still opt into because they don't really care much about the consequences.
Okay, fair. Is there a reason as to why they don't care about the consequences?
I
Is it
think
because they already went? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I think what they can gain by getting away with the crime is more. So they wait, and then that's what makes them make the choice.
Excellent. This is quite useful because it says what they can gain by the crime is more. What the statement means is that their current life is so bad that they would rather be jailed than live the life that they're living right now. Which means a lot of crimes on scale are crimes of necessity, which is they happen because the socioeconomic conditions of these people is so bad that they would rather attempt to steal, that they would rather attempt to murder and loot than continue to live the life that they live right now. Which is why when you have people committing crimes of necessity and they think that the punishment is better than the life that I'm living right now, deterrence doesn't work on them because they have nothing to lose. This is why deterrence doesn't work on the most vulnerable criminals, because the reason that they commit a crime is because they have nothing to lose and that their situation right now is so bad that they would rather risk being caught. These are unique reasons as to why deterrence also doesn't work. So if there is ever a debate wherein people are arguing as to whether the CJS and its explicit punishments ends up stopping crime or not, you have reasons to explain both. You can give reasons for why people are rational. Most people are rational, and this is taught young. Also, life in jail is just very, very bad, which is conveyed to people through movies. So most people don't commit a crime. But you can also always give reasons for why some people will always continue to commit crimes because it happens out of impulse, because it happens out of necessity, because the law enforcement that catches people is corrupt, and also because every criminal thinks that they won't get caught. Optimism bias. Thus, people still end up doing crime. Is the concept of deterrence and in what situations does it work and in what situations does it not work? Is this differentiation clear to everyone?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
it is.
lovely. Let's just go to the second part of utility then, which somebody brought up earlier, rehab. I think all of you know what rehab is, but could somebody just explain in their own words what they think rehabilitation means?
I
Since
guess it is people who have been like in gone to jail, for example, and have been taken away from society. You are training them in a way to integrate again into the same society because they have been away for so long.
Yes, effectively helping people integrate back into society because they've been isolated, cut out, and things like that. What else?
A
Anything
way of
else?
reforming their mindset, like if they had such criminal mindsets, rehabilitation basically helps in reforming and kind of separating them from that criminal ideological mindset.
True. Focusing on internal reformation, fixing the root cause as to why they committed the crime, which is often bad education. So, helping them realize that there is value in legal systems and respecting the autonomy of other individuals, which is how you fix the root cause of their crime. Cool. All of you understand what rehab is. Can someone explain why we need rehab? Like, if these people are so bad and they committed a crime, why should we invest state money in helping them get back?
The
To
first
reduce
assumption that these people
recidivism.
are so bad is wrong. Like probably, many of the criminals are probably not so bad. Probably they committed a crime out of necessity, and perhaps like if you give them enough opportunity, they will realize that okay, just because I'm in such a bad situation in life doesn't mean that I can go and actively harm other people. Probably, the state can like maybe give some money so that they can it is okay that won't happen, but anyways, like that's just a starting point to think. Secondly, that some reformation might be occurring, like if for example that's a person who is just lost in life or hasn't thought through his actions, or maybe he committed a crime in impulsiveness, like those cases are ones where rehab might work, like you might be able to reform them.
True. A lot of these people are reformable. Oftentimes, they commit crimes in impulse, so they can be changed. This shouldn't be absolute punishment. What else? Can somebody else give me reasons for why you
I
need
think
rehab?
I would.
Go ahead.
People don't become criminal in abstract. There is a process through which they become criminal, and state has failed to give them that fulfillment or meaningful upbringing that needed for them to not become a criminal. So it was a long process through state could have intervened in that process, but since state did not, state failed them in that capacity. So
Yeah, that's an excellent reason. The first reason as to why you need rehabilitation is quite literally because it's state duty. And the reason that it's state duty is because presumably a lot of these people became criminals, as we discussed, because their economic conditions suck, because they didn't have access to education. One might ask, why is this the case? Is it not the state's imperative to provide good education and healthcare to people? So if people are becoming criminals out of bare necessity because their baseline humanitarian conditions weren't met, this means that this is state failure. Thus, it's the state's imperative to pay some sort of reparations to these people who are criminals. Thus, it's quite literally the state's responsibility to rehabilitate these individuals who became criminals because of necessity by helping them come back to society. So, the first reason is just that it's the state's fault that they're criminals. Thus, it's the state's duty to rehabilitate them. Excellent. What's another reason?
If in
As
terms of state, yeah, sure, go.
as mentioned, they might be suffering from some psychological harm, so it would be better to provide some mental counseling because in a psychological harm they might have committed some crime and they might be
True.
morally good.
That's right. That's correct. My question is why? Why do you need to help them? I get that you need to help them. The question is why. The first is that the state has to help them because it's the state's fault. What's another reason
Uh,
as to why you need
I
to
think
give these people help?
a reason of why they need to be helped is so that they can get another chance at life. Since like most of these people do crimes out of necessity or impulse, they are not inherently have that not that vicious enough. So they do need to get a second chance at life, so that when they go back into society, they can integrate into society and live a better life. So they do deserve rehabilitation.
True. People deserve a second chance. Can someone think of a more utility-based reason? Like,
Because
Yeah,
they
what's
can
in
the...
have
terms of
choice.
Uh,
If it's a
is it
crime of
Okay,
necessity
okay,
or
hold on.
any other.
Can you folks like hold your hands because we have multiple people speaking over each other? Just a second, I'll check. Uh, okay. Uh, yeah. Ansh, go for it, then Nirmay, and then Aryan.
all right, so it might be a long shot, but is it because just having punishment, there's like people who are wrongly prosecuted, so just having punishment causes too much fear in the people because there is no way for them to get out, it is just jail time? Like, is it something like that? Like people actually want to be good too, but they have no opportunity once they go into the jail because there's nothing like rehab available.
Fair enough. That's actually not a bad reason. Keeping them in jail continuously might make them apathetic towards the system. This might take away any shot at rehabilitation whatsoever. Uh, Nirmay, yeah,
If you don't give them any means to re-enter the society, they're going to relapse into those crimes, be it
exactly.
impulsively, be it of necessity.
Excellent. The most selfish, utile reason that the state has to rehabilitate is that if you don't fix the root cause of their criminal intent, then they often fall into what you call as recidivism, which is they become criminals again. And this is obviously something that the state doesn't want. So there is a selfish incentive in helping these people rehabilitate, which is that you deter them or you stop them from falling into the same cycle of crime if you fix the root cause. Thus, this has maximal utility. Uh, yes, Aryan, and then Xavier.
Yeah, in terms of state, the jails and all probably will require a lot of taxpayer money, which means that if you are a state, probably if you can deter or like rehabilitate these people back into as a functional citizen, you will be these people will be much more productive in terms of economy, and you probably have to spend less amount of money on these people and probably spend use jails as a people specific for people who are already either psychopathic, sociopathic in nature, or probably very very extreme amount of criminals, and not have smaller amount of criminals coming back again and again in prison.
Excellent. Yep. You'll save up on a lot of money that you would have spent on jails. But second, these people, if they come out rehabilitated, they often get jobs, which is good for the economy because they earn money and they spend money. True. Xavier?
In terms of cost benefit, rehabilitation's benefit exceeds the cost that rehabilitation gives us or the counterfactuals that exist. For example, having them on jail, which is costly, but or probably just giving them a capital punishment, which is a disproportionate amount of harm towards them. So since we have two or three alternatives, which is jail time or capital punishment, the only real alternative we have, which is also beneficial for the society as a whole, in terms of cost benefit, is rehabilitation. But this is strictly speaking from utilitarian perspective.
True. Very true. It's much more utile than other alternatives in terms of the productivity that you do derive out of rehabilitating these people. Correct. Is anyone yet to answer? I think Dikshita. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's quite similar to the second point, but I'll say that we can analyze it a step further. As in, for example, if this person is jailed, and let's assume, like most criminals, he's from a lower socioeconomic background, and his he's already struggling, which means that probably, of course, his family is also struggling. He might be married, he might have parents or kids or something. So if one member who was probably supporting the family goes away, now this family is suffering. Now, when that person comes back, you are not rehabilitating him. Now, he does not have the previous economic opportunities. He's also socially shunned. On top of it, you have not given him any chance to improve or, go back into the society, which means that now he himself is more susceptible to fall into the same criminal tracks. Moreover, now his entire family is vulnerable. The people around him are vulnerable. So that's why we see now that the son of a previous convict tends to be have criminal tendencies as well. Like this criminal tendencies which tend to run in the immediate family because the entire family suffers when one person is jailed and the state doesn't take any measure to help the family or anything.
That's actually very creative and bang on correct. Oftentimes, when you end up jailing people and when you don't help them integrate back, oftentimes these criminals are the sole breadwinners of the family per se. So you have children left behind, and you have like wives left behind who often don't have any other means for economic sustenance. So it's quite likely that if you have the criminal jailed up without rehabilitating them and helping them reintegrate, their families are often quite susceptible to falling into the same lives, which is lives of criminality. Thus, you indirectly are increasing criminality if you don't help these people reintegrate back, which also is principally wrong on two levels because you are causing harm to a third party that was not the criminal, which is the family in this case, which loses a breadwinner. But secondly, you also compel them to resort to lives of crime again, which is state failure a second time. Thus, it's quite imperative for you to ensure that the third party in this case is not harmed, which is the family of criminals. You ensure that they get basic economic sustenance, and second, you ensure that they don't resort to lives of crime, all of which is contingent on the original criminal being rehabilitated and being sent back in a productive manner in a way in which he or she is reformed. Cool. Let's move to the third utile benefit or the third utile purpose of the CGS, which is the last that we'll be discussing for now. Victim closure. Somebody mentioned this beforehand when it came to incarceration. All of you know what victim closure means, but would somebody like to briefly explain what they think it means? Like, what does victim closure mean? What exactly is the closure that the victim is getting?
Yeah,
Can you raise
the
your
closure
hand?
in terms of, okay, if someone did wrong to me, they're not escaping without consequences. Now, this is not just principally required, but this is also a utility, this is a benefit to the state itself. Why? Because, for example, if the state is not taking any action and nobody is getting consequence for their action, the people might lose faith from the system itself. And once people lose faith for the system, the entire fabric which holds the society together, that okay, we give up some of our freedoms in exchange for some security that the state or the government gives us. This entire exchange or that stability of this exchange of power that goes on, that I'm giving up my freedom for some protection that you're giving me. Now, when I don't believe in you anymore, the entire structure of the society might break down, and yeah, that's bad for the state as a whole.
So, very accurate. The reason is that people become apathetic when they don't see their perpetrators being punished, which is when they don't get catharsis. Jannat?
I think one, it helps correctly like restore trust in institutions, but also sometimes closure is important because they can just help victims process their trauma better and reduce the psychological and emotional distress and impact the crime had on them, which is like prolonged, which might just build resentment in them and stuff.
True, that's quite accurate. The first reason as to why victim closure is important is oftentimes associated with your mental feelings before anything to do with the state. Like this is just to say that all of us have been socialized since our school days to believe that uh, punishment is firstly an explicit recognition of wrong. So oftentimes when you were in school and somebody did something wrong to you, the first layer of punishment would be for the teacher or anyone in authority to publicly recognize that this person did something wrong, which is why oftentimes we have very strong impulsive feelings to ensure that people who have done anything wrong to us are recognized in that regard. So, the first reason as to why people do not feel closure when you don't jail or punish people, or punish criminals rather, is that they feel massive neglect and they feel that their feelings have been hurt on a massive level because the recognition of wrongdoing of their perpetrator has not been made. Thus, this looks like amplified feelings of pain, bitterness towards the system, but also massive agony because oftentimes these crimes are pretty traumatic. So, all these feelings linger around in a person's head when you don't punish a person or you don't punish their perpetrator, so to say. Uh, why are these feelings lingering around in a person's head bad?
Uh,
So I think
may
a reason for that is that once over a period of time, if they keep lingering around, these people can generate a sense of hatred and may, attack the criminal himself. They may develop criminal tendencies to take revenge. So this can turn into a revengeous action and can go into leading crime.
So, the first reason as to why this is bad is I think all of us have an evolutionary instinct for bloodthirst, which is oftentimes revenge is first instinct when something wrong happens to us. Thus, if negative feelings are allowed to persist, oftentimes this leads to a negative cycle of crime or violence or hurt. What's another reason as to why these feelings lingering around are bad?
I
Yeah,
think
Xavier, go ahead.
on a societal level, it also sends a message that, hey, since no one is going to listen to if something bad happens to you, so it's perfectly fine for you to essentially take action against any injustice that happens to you. Probably creates a society where violence is much more promoted or like acceptable.
True. Yes. What's another reason beyond
I
people
think
becoming more violent?
I
yeah,
think it might be.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I'll just speak. Uh, can you all raise your hands? Whoever wants to answer. Yeah, Xavier, go for it.
whenever a crime happens, the first layer of harm happens to a victim. And the most extreme extent that the person who gets harmed is also the victim, even before the society, even before the law enforcement and everything. Given that is the case, I think their consideration is the most important one. That is the reason why we ought to care about victims' closure.
True. Uh, yeah, that makes sense. The most severely affected is the victim. Dikshita.
So, like, if we see beyond this, the trust in the system itself and the catharsis of the victim, we can also see it at a social level in the sense that, let's say, people in general see that, okay, this person was harmed, disproportionately, but the state doesn't do anything. Then this develops an apathy, in them as well. That now, for example, if something wrong happens, now, like, either they are not raising their voices or they become apathetic to whatever wrong is happening around them. Secondly, this might, like, for example, the victim is harmed and and let's assume they don't go for revenge because of the various, like, maybe there are punishments that are there are enough to deter the victim, let's say, that they don't go for revenge. But even in that case, they are going to spiral into a, mental cycle of itself that, okay, I was, perpetrated, but there was no action taken against it, which means that they might lose their will to live as well. So, they might, in extreme cases, of course, or, they might in just case, they might become bitter, and this will impact the people around them itself, which means that, yeah. So it has an impact on the victim's family, on the nearby people, and the society in general.
Makes sense. Yes, all of that is correct. Jannat.
Largely just along the lines of what Dikshita said, I think all of this unresolved trauma would affect relationships and work and mental health and overall quality of life for the victim because they would develop an unhealthy obsession and trauma regarding the crime and event.
Absolutely. Parmarth.
So one more reason why victim closure is very important because these victims are a part of society. So in the situations where they're not getting closure, there is going to be a bad optics in terms of justice system. So more number of people are going to be incentivized to probably opt for brass justice system and etc. kind of systems because they now don't see any sort of like value in the justice system and now say that it's very corrupt and something like that.
True. All of you are spot on, correct. So the first reason that you have already covered as to why these feelings lingering around is bad is because they often fuel bloodthirst. But also, this leads to massive fear and paranoia amongst people because if they know that the person who committed a grave crime on them has not been punished and is roaming around in society, this often creates an irrational fear in their mind which is that a crime might happen to them again because their perpetrator is not behind bars. So they often fear their own life, but also the life of individuals that are other potential victims. But to complete this reason, the reason that this fear and paranoia about their own life and the life of other potential victims is bad is because this takes away the ability for them to live their own life and enjoy other activities in life. The illustration for this is quite simple. If you were massively paranoid of a criminal that did something wrong to you, but is roaming scotch free because, well, the system didn't punish them, and these feelings are traumatic, as you all said, and these feelings are lingering around in your head, would you have the capability to go bowling with your friends or to go to school and chill and act as if nothing happened? Or would these feelings massively take away your ability to live your normal life? What do you think? Anyone?
I have a question over here. I understood from the perspective of the victim, but I'm not understanding from other potential victims. Like,
Yeah,
why
so
would
the
they
yeah,
have
true.
paranoia?
No, other potential victims wouldn't have paranoia. You, as the victim, would fear other people who could be victims. So you would be worried about other people. That basically there's a criminal out there who did something wrong to you. So that person can also harm others around you who are also potential victims. So,
Okay, okay,
yeah,
understood.
that's the logic. Yeah. So the question again is, if these negative feelings are like lingering in your head, would you have the capacity to enjoy other life activities? Or do you think these feelings are so traumatic that they're often overbearing on your psyche?
That would depend on the crime being committed. For example, if the crime was like the murder of a close family member or a rape or something very serious, maybe gunpoint robbery or something, probably it would affect. But maybe it's if it's a minor theft or something, probably not. So like it probably
True.
depends on the magnitude and the violence of the crime itself.
Quite accurate. Oftentimes, the trauma or the lingering of these feelings and how it affects your life depends on the intensity of the crime. But this also means that victim catharsis, regardless of the intensity of the crime, is quite important because to some extent or for some time frame, it does take away the ability for you to enjoy other things. But also because this fear and paranoia and cyclical scale of violence and bloodthirst is bad. But the last reason as to why victim catharsis is important is just what Dikshita said earlier, I think, which is about state duty. So the idea here is the social contract, right? You give away a lot of your ability to self-defend by giving the state the authority to make laws. So they are making laws on your behalf because you gave them some power and you restricted your own ability to self-defend. This means that it's the state's duty or the state's imperative to ensure that crime doesn't happen, which means in any instance wherein a crime happened, it's state failure. Thus, it's again state duty to pay reparations to victims. That's why jailing people is very important. You can't let criminals walk scotch free because you have to pay reparations to victims who suffered because you, as the state, failed to do your duty to protect them. It's your duty to have law enforcement. It's your duty to ensure that crime doesn't happen to people. So if crime does happen, it's your ability or your imperative to ensure that those people are compensated. And the way to compensate them is to punish the perpetrator. Does the utility based purpose of the criminal justice system make sense up until this point? I'll just sum it up real quick for you to understand what we spoke about. Public protection, first, jailing people. We discussed why you need to jail people because they're often likely to recommit crime if they're not physically distanced from their ability to commit crime. Second, we spoke about deterrence and we discussed in what instance it works, in what instance it doesn't work. Then we discussed rehab, and then we discussed the reasons for why you need rehab. Then we discussed why victim closure and why giving this sense of catharsis to victims is so important. Does the workshop make sense up until this point?
Yes.
Cool. This is where the workshop gets interesting because if I were to ask all of you, if you could sum the purpose of the CJS up until this point in one word, what would that one word be?
Victim.
Okay. Avni?
Retribution.
Okay. Think of a more appropriate word. We've been discussing a common theme across all these three things. Uh, Ansh.
State failure.
Okay, no. Gurudat?
Prevention
Justice.
of crime, justice.
No. Anyone else? Parmarth?
Crimes.
No. The answer is utility. The core purpose of the criminal justice system, amongst the facets that we've studied up until this point, is just utility or maximizing for practical output. The interesting thing about this workshop now is that we will now discuss the principles governing the CJS. Now we've discussed the purpose of it. Now we'll discuss the principles. The funny thing about this is that all the principles of the criminal justice system have been designed to reduce utility. This might seem a little trivial as of now. It might seem confusing. If the purpose is to maximize utility, why are the principles of the criminal justice system those that reduce your utility to like curb crime and things like that? But I'll explain this using an example. So there are 5 principles that we need to know about, and all of these are actually counterbalance against pure utility. The first principle, before I explain this, I'll just like give you a very basic idea. Let's say I was the police commissioner of a state. The best utile way to reduce crime is to basically do massive investments in prison systems, is to do massive investments in surveillance, and have a database ready of all potential criminals in the city, round all of them up and put them in jail. Criminals, potential criminals, people who are susceptible to lives of crime, round up everyone, put them in jail. This will drop your crime rates by a magnitude, and it will almost drop down to zero in one night. And the state does have the money to do this. Then the question is, if utility is the purpose of the CJS, why don't state systems do this? Why don't you just arrest everyone who's susceptible of crime? If utility is the goal of the CJS, why don't you do that? Can someone answer?
Can you repeat yourself, please?
Okay, I'll make it simpler. It's very easy for us to reduce crime rates by effectively investing a lot of money into prisons. So, to increase the accommodation capacity of prisons, then invest a lot of money into intel gathering and surveillance. Figure out a database of all people in a city who are likely to commit crime, round all of them up, and put them in jail. People who are criminals, people who are potentially criminals, people who have shown markers of crime or are likely to commit crime, probably 100 to 200,000 people, put all of them in jail, your crime rate drops to almost zero. Why doesn't the CJS do this? If utility is the goal. Yeah, Gurudat.
I mean, the principle
Because
itself is wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Gurudat, go for it.
we believe in this principle of giving people a benefit of doubt of they have not committed the crime, and hence we don't do.
Exactly. This means that the first principle, which says innocent until proven guilty, which is you need to have evidence beyond reasonable doubt to put people in jail, does this not undercut utility? Because the utile thing to do is just to arrest everyone that you have a doubt on. That will help you reduce crime rates so easily. Yet the principle doesn't allow you to do it because it goes against utility and it says that you ought to give people reasonable doubt. Even if you think that this person is certainly guilty, but the way in which the evidence was gathered against them was unlawful, you still have to let them walk, in spite of you knowing that they're a criminal. But also, if let's say it's a politically charged person, and you know that arresting them will lead to massive riots and outright violence, you still arrest them because there is proven guilt. So the first principle doesn't take into account overall utility. It just gives people reasonable doubt. And if there is evidence that proves guilt, you arrest them. But only then do you arrest them. You can't arrest them on suspicion. So this is to say that the criminal justice system on principle does not just work on utility. It has counterbalances against utility. The first thing is innocent until proven guilty. It's very self-explanatory. The second thing is non-instrumentalization. Can someone guess what instrumentalization means?
Like using these systems, that is law enforcement and everything, to serve political purposes, for example, the government's purposes, that it does. It might, for example, if there are opposition voices or something, you just arrest them or something, like use them as a political instrument, perhaps. No idea.
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
not using people as a means to an end.
Very good. In this context, instrumentalization often means using people as tools to achieve some practical goal, which is basically using them as means to end. So the principle of non-instrumentalization is just that you don't use people as a means to an end, because The assumption in the criminal justice system is that everyone, regardless of who they are, whether they are victims, whether they're criminals, whether they're convicts, all of these people have inherent human dignity that is to be maintained at all times. Thus, you can't treat these people for a pure utilitarian purpose because you have to preserve their dignity, which is why they're assumed to be innocent until proven guilty. This also goes against utility because the utile thing to do is to treat all of these people as instruments so as to achieve deterrence, so as to achieve reduction in crime. But you don't do that because the principle of the CJS doesn't allow you to use people as tools. You have to give them the benefit of doubt. Do the two principles make sense? Any doubts on the two principles? Okay, I'm assuming not. The third is proportionality. And the example for this is quite simple. I think all of you know what proportionality means. It just means the punishment that you do have for people has to be in tandem with the degree to which the crime existed. So you can't give people disproportionate or too large of a punishment for too little of a crime. Uh, so comparing this to utility, like imagine that you want to reduce instances of shoplifting. The utile way to do this is to declare that the punishment for shoplifting will be that your hands will be chopped off. If you declare this punishment, probably nobody will shoplift. It's a very utile way of stopping people to shoplift. But is it proportionate? Is chopping somebody's hands because they, I don't know, stole a packet of chocolate, is that a proportionate punishment?
No.
No.
No,
Of course it's not. Yeah. It's too high of a punishment for this. So, what is the thing that you understand about these principles, especially the principle of proportionality and utility? Because it's more utile to give people massive punishments for small crimes because it deters them. But can you do that? What do you understand about the relationship of the principle of proportionality versus utility? Is it pro utility? Is it anti utility?
It's anti-utility because utilitarian would tell you that go as far beyond as possible to achieve the maximum utility. But proportionality tells you that you should only punish someone based on the degree of harm they have caused to the society. Not more than that, not less than that.
Exactly. If you think about it, all the purposes of the criminal justice system were maximize utility, ensure you put people in jail, ensure you give victims catharsis, ensure you rehabilitate people. But all the principles are in tension with utility because they tell the system to not be too violent, to not cause too much deterrence, to not go all guns blazing. They tell the system to be careful, to give people dignity. So there is a tension between the purpose and the principles of the CJS, which balance pure utility in and of itself. The fourth principle of the CJS that you must know is ethics of intent. So there are two things. Those of you who are law students would know this, but there are two things basically actus reus and mens rea. Actus reus refers to a guilty act, and mens rea refers to a guilty mind. So the premise in criminal law is that for something to be criminalized, it should both have an act that is guilty, but also a mind that is guilty. So the example for this is just that if I actively steal somebody's pen, I'm guilty of a crime. But if somebody's pen falls into my bag by accident and I don't realize it, that's not a crime because the act existed but intent did not. Thus, for you to establish criminality, you need to have both a guilty act and a guilty mind. If there is an absence of a guilty mind, it's not a crime. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, in that sense, I have a question. For example, uh, I'm standing on a bridge, there is a knife in my hand, and there is a person just below. Thus, a strong gust of wind comes, and the knife falls from my hand, and the person below dies. So, like, it's not like stealing a pen. Like, stealing a pen was, technically harmless, apart from the person, whose pen was stolen, and this was not a big harm. But here, somebody's life has been taken, their families are going to be impacted, his entire life is ended and everything. So now here, how does that balance out? Like, I did not have the intent, it was purely a mistake, but the person is dead, which means the act had very severe consequences. So how do you balance this out? So is this a crime or is this not a crime?
True. That's actually a very good question. But I think the first question that I would have as the police officer is, what are you doing with the knife on a bridge? But I think the more nuanced way to answer this is just that oftentimes when these things are evaluated, if you were doing something that poses disproportionate risk to your surroundings, there is often a principle of negligence in law, which is, let's say you're driving a car and you end up knocking somebody down and you didn't have intent. you probably don't have a guilty mind, but that still accounts for punishment because there is negligence involved. So you were doing something that could have potentially caused human harm to someone, and you still ended up doing it. So maybe you're not guilty of ill intent, but you were negligent, and that's what caused somebody's death. Thus, you are punishable. Maybe you're not as much punishable as somebody with a guilty mind would be, but there is some punishment under negligence itself. Similarly, if you have a knife, it's a weapon, like to be precise, and it's capable of killing other people. So if somebody died because you dropped a knife, even by accident, it's still negligence. So you will be convicted and you will be charged for negligence, even though you didn't have a guilty mind. Which is why I use the pen example, because it doesn't involve active harm to life. Thus, negligence doesn't kick in. But the premise still remains that it's not a crime if it doesn't have a guilty mind. But if you were doing something that preemptively involves threat to somebody's life and you still weren't careful enough, then you are negligent. And negligence has its own punishments in due course, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. But that also, I like from your answer, I get a second question. I'm not sure how relevant that is. I can answer it in the end as well if you want. But that was a question that, like, recently I was reading a paper from the 20th century regarding the ethics of charity. So it was a long ass paper, but at the end, the conclusion was that since you know that you not donating to charity is going to maybe kill a child, many thousand miles off. Like for example, a child is dying in Africa of malaria. You can prevent that by just donating 10 rupees to charity. There are charities which exist which are going to utilize their money well. You know that. You also know that the child there is not going to die, which means that you are actively aware that of the harm that could happen, and you still choose not to do anything. So in this case, would you be guilty? I'm not sure if this relates to the workshop, but this was just a question I was curious about. I'm not sure how anybody would answer this. So, like, yeah.
Yeah, we can obviously talk about this later, but a very summarized answer would be no, because you are not necessarily complicit in active harm to the person. So this is basically an act versus omission debate, which is if you don't do action and that causes harm, is that guilt or not? It's a very philosophical and moral debate in itself. It's quite long, and I have a lot of thoughts in it. So maybe we can talk about it later.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's a
sure.
good question.
Yeah, I would like to
Uh,
have a talk on this if you are free. Yeah.
sure. The fifth principle, then, beyond intent, is predictability, which is that any person doing anything must have a reasonable interpretation of what consequences follow. So the application of law needs to be very uniform. Every person doing anything needs to be certain of what harms will follow. So you can't have an ununiform law that people don't know in terms of what punishment will this cause, is it punishable or not. Thus, law in itself needs to be predictable, and people need to be aware of the consequences of whatever they're doing in society. These are the five principles that you ought to know about the CJS, which is people are presumed to be innocent until you have massive proof of guilt. Second, there is dignity in every human inherently, and you can't treat them as tools. Third, punishments need to be proportional to the crime committed. Fourth, you both need a guilty act and a guilty mind for something to be criminal. And fifth, laws need to be universally applicable. Laws need to be uniformly applicable, and they need to be predictable with respect to people knowing what punishments will follow. All of this is in tension with utility because it reduces utility, but ensures and places a premium on the value of human life and human dignity. So you must always remember that the purpose of the CJS is pure utility, but its principles are ones that balance utility by placing a premium on human dignity itself. Does this make
Shishir,
sense?
I had a doubt. If you could explain how predictability as a principle goes against utility again. I didn't catch it.
Yeah, so the idea effectively is that you ought to scare people by deterrence, which is you need to tell them that anything that they do will have massive consequences and things like that. But if you tie back that to proportionality, there are specific sentences for specific crimes. For example, if you shoplift, you will have, let's say, I don't know what the specific punishment for shoplifting is, but it's probably a fine or 1 or 2 days in jail or things like that, or a bail amount. So the idea of predictability is that people need to specifically know what punishment will follow if they do what act. So you can't basically scare people by saying that if you shoplift, your hands will be cut. That's the utile thing to do. But you need to predictably tell them what punishment will follow if they do what, even if it comes at the cost of them doing that crime. Like if I were to give a simple example for this, The utile thing to do is to tell every shoplifter that your hands will be chopped off. Thus, they won't do it. But you need to make the law predictable for them. Thus, you need to tell them if you shoplift, you will get X punishment. If you murder someone, you will get Y punishment. Even if this leads to them doing a crime because they think that the punishment is less, that's okay. But they need to be very predictable about what the punishment is. That's why it's slightly against utility because it might reduce deterrence. But people need to know what exact punishment will follow if they do what act, is the idea here. Does this make
Yeah,
sense?
I have a question exactly on that. I get that it's against utility, but I'm not sure the underlying principle here. Like, what is the underlying principle that governing the idea of predictability? That why do a person need to know what is exactly gonna follow? Why does that person has a principal obligation to know that, or like state has a principle, or the law has an obligation to tell that?
Yeah, I think the obligation is just to ensure uniformity in behavior, which is to say, if people don't have the agentic knowledge of what the consequences of their actions are, then can you really blame them for committing that action? Because the assumption in criminality is that a person is guilty because they committed a wrong in spite of knowing that it's wrong. So if the premise is that they don't know that X action leads to Y punishment, thus they don't know that X action is wrong. Thus, are they really criminal if they committed X action without the knowledge that it's wrong?
Yeah,
Thus,
makes
the
sense.
reason that yeah, thus the reason that predictability is important as a principle is because it ensures that people are aware preemptively of the consequences of their actions. Thus, it's important as a principle.
So that any law does not apply to them retroactively or something like that.
Exactly, yes. So that you don't punish them retroactively by saying, "Oh, you did X thing in the past. You didn't know it was a crime, but you still did it. Thus, you're guilty now." To evade those circumstances, you ensure that everyone knows what their behavior brings about preemptively. Uh, Jyoti, did the example make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. Then we've completed the bulk of the session. Now we'll move through it like a breeze because you know most of the things that I uh, aimed to convey to you. Let's just go to the second part then, which is trial. This is very simple. There are like three facets under trial. The first is gathering of evidence. And the explanation for this is quite simple. The only thing that you need to know about this is that oftentimes the law enforcement operates in bad ways. This looks like white policemen being like explicitly racist to black communities and arresting them more because there is a confirmation bias. So if they already have a social perception that people from black communities are likely to commit crime, they often look for evidence that confirms their pre-existing bias, which is why more arrests happen on racial grounds and things like this. But this has a very negative cyclical loop because then the black community or any minority community for that matter becomes very cynical about the law enforcement because they think that they're being deliberately targeted. Thus, they actually start resorting to more crime because they think that the law enforcement anyways hates them. So this becomes a whole self-perpetuating cycle wherein they're being arrested because of bias. That bias is leading to cynicism, wherein these people are hating the police and thus they're doing more crime. So it's becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, so to say. So this is one thing that you ought to remember about the evidence gathering process, that there's often a lot of confirmation bias in the way that you make these arrests. The second thing is lawyers. And I do want to spend some time
Excuse
here.
me,
Yeah, sorry.
what is meant by legal cynicism?
Yeah, so legal cynicism just means that basically people from poor and vulnerable communities, those who are being targeted by racial profiling, suddenly develop a sense of apathy and hatred towards the law enforcement. That's what cynicism means. Basically, developing massive apathy and non cooperation with a certain entity. So when the police does it, they often hate the police even more, thus resulting in more hate crimes and more pushback against the authorities. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Solid. Let's just talk about lawyers then. Uh, so the first question is, why do you need lawyers in the criminal justice system? Like, how do they help you? Can anyone answer?
Lawyers will help you because they have studied the law and they know the law better than you. You might know the law superficially, like, oh, what is the punishment, but you would not know what is the procedure, what is the loophole. So they are the best who can guide you and help you.
Excellent. Lawyers help you procedurally. They have the abilities to find technicalities within law, technicalities that can help your case. These are not skills that the average layperson has because these are often things involving specialist knowledge, which requires you to spend some time in the field. Yeah, Parmarth.
So there is a specific conduct which each court has to have. So in these situations, if you don't have a specialized person, you are probably going to act in an irrational manner, and you are not going to argue to judge, and you will act in a bad manner. And that's why it's better to have a lawyer to
True.
maintain the decorum of court.
True. Oftentimes, you need people who are inept within the legal system who can get things done, which are often lawyers because they're just charismatic people more often than not. But also they have specific connections within courts. They have goodwill with judges, which is why they're quite likely to get you favorable or preferable results if at all you go through them versus you trying things out yourself because lawyers help you circumvent the legal system. The third thing is just that often they're very specialized in certain fields like tax, like criminal law, family law, and things like this, which can be quite helpful in dealing with a specific nuance of the case that you're at hand. One argument that is often made within these debates is that lawyers cost money, which is why corporations and rich individuals have disproportionate access to these lawyers. Uh, there is also converse reasoning to be made, which explains why poor people also get access to lawyers. Can somebody give me reasons as to why poor people also have access to lawyers?
So nowadays there
Probably
is
Yeah, raise your hands, please.
so nowadays there is existence of pro bono as well as legal aid. So even like poor people also have access to good lawyers.
True. Pro bono work. Aryan, yes.
Yeah, a lot of like countries or like states specifically go ahead and employ lawyers themselves to allow people who are like do not have the financial capacity to get legal aid from the government themselves.
Correct. Ansh?
There are more lawyers than there are rich people. So, like, the poor people also, there'll be some lawyers who will be able to access to.
True. Logically makes sense. The first thing is yes, that a lot of lawyers want to do pro bono work, and there are multiple reasons for this. The first is that oftentimes the amount of pro bono work that you do as a lawyer is a status signal. So it's a very strong social capital accumulation strategy for lawyers to do pro bono work because it often acts as a status symbol in parties when big lawyers can say that I did X amount of pro bono work. So they often do it for social capital. But second, oftentimes a lot of big lawyers are guilty of being involved with criminals or defending criminals in court. Thus, they often do it as a guilt alleviation tactic. Like it makes you feel good that you fought a case for a poor individual who wouldn't have had justice otherwise. So lawyers, when overburdened with guilt of defending rich criminals, often resort to pro bono work because it allows them some channel to alleviate their guilt. The third reason is just that the state mandates a lot of pro bono work from successful lawyers because it's the state's imperative to provide pro bono services. So these are a couple of reasons as to why pro bono work happens. What are other reasons as to why poor people get lawyers? Xavier.
Yeah, I have a question here though.
Yeah, Dikshita, go ahead.
The number of poor people is disproportionately larger than the number of lawyers available. Moreover, you cannot guarantee that there are a huge number of cases which go on, right? So you cannot guarantee that every poor person is going to get a lawyer. Probably the ones who are most highlighted by the media or someone who have a really uh, heartbreaking or heart-wrenching case, probably they are going to get lawyers. The others, with serious crimes, probably won't get lawyers. Moreover, how can you assure the quality of, legal work that they are going to get? Because every lawyer out there in the market, I agree that some of the big lawyers might be there, who are just doing it for social capital. They
True.
might do good work, but what about the others that the government provides? What about the mandatory work? How do you ensure that the
Uh,
quality of legal services are good?
yeah, all of this is correct, and that's just empirical reality. Not all poor people get access to lawyers. So this argument is not to say that everyone gets the benefit of pro bono work and that the quality of all these lawyers is equivalent to the quality of lawyers that corporations and rich people do get. Like obviously that's an untrue argument. These are just reasons for why poor people have some access to lawyers. It's not to say that they have the best access or all of them have access. That's just empirically untrue. All of us know it. So these are just reasons to explain why some poor people have access to some lawyers because there are pro bono incentives. The premise of this is not at all to say that all poor people are hunky dory and they have it well off. Yes, Xavier.
Yeah, how true is it that lawyers do feel guilty for defending someone who might just be victim because you're someone who is on that process to become one? Is it empirically true or is it just a debate and argument?
Good question. I think I would know it someday later. But I've heard it's true. I've heard a lot of people do pro bono work because of actual guilt, especially those that work in criminal law. So I don't think it's just a debate land argument. But I hope it's true. I mean, I feel they should do some guilt alleviation if it helps them this way. Uh, yeah, Nirmay.
Yeah, since we just discussed what confirmation bias exists with the law enforcement, like the police systems, right? Which is why I think the judiciary deems it important that these people, the people who have evidence against themselves, also have an opportunity to have a discussion about what they've done and if it's true or not, which is why they can also provide a lawyer to them. If I'm too poor to afford one, the state will give me one. So in that
Yes.
sense, poor people always have a lawyer or they have access to it.
Yeah, that's spot on. Oftentimes, the judiciary is aware of the law enforcement's racial biases. Thus, they provide for pro bono lawyers themselves. Like, oftentimes, courts mandate good lawyers to do pro bono work. Yeah, Nahush.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I believe there are a lot of social activism lawyers as well, right? Like people who specifically do law and like defend people on the basis of like specific minorities. For example, like the black community has a lot of lawyers who specifically like, defend people or advocate for people for free just because they suspect racial bias and things like that, right?
Yes, very accurate. Oftentimes, there's massive social activism, liberal organizations, NGOs that specifically hire lawyers and recruit lawyers that do like litigation in these humanitarian aspects or anti-discriminatory aspects. Yes, Gurudat.
A lot of these poor people end up having lawyers because a lot of inconsistencies in the government system itself are at the bottom level suffered by these poor people, which means that the lawyers have an incentive to challenge the legislation or government in entirety. Why are these poor people being highlighted? Which means that these people like this lawyer also gets better visibility because judiciary is a different element as compared to government by challenging the government at its peak. Why are these poor people?
That's actually a very creative reason. Oftentimes, doing PILs or any litigation that is anti-state gets you a lot of media attention because it's just quite like sensational to, let's say, litigate or take the state to court, take the government to court. And oftentimes these violations happen on the poorest of the poor because those are the people that are affected by these policies. Thus, it's in the lawyer's selfish incentive to gain visibility by attacking the state in court, which often has cases representing the most poor people. So this is another reason as to why lawyers would represent poor people for their own selfish incentives. That's a very good reason. Yes, Aryan.
Wouldn't like some NGOs also exist like who try to like help
Yeah,
within their best of capacity to help like another to these poor people, or another could be like a lot of of poor people like marginalized people get harmed. So a lot of the probably some lawyers go ahead and like who like probably want more fame because these group and like form a group case where a lot of probably specific companies get harm these people. So make a group case entirety get more amount of fame and like also help these people out.
true, true. We discussed this. There is obviously visibility benefits. There are obviously social activism benefits. And people do it out of pro bono needs because the state mandates it. They get capital. They alleviate guilt in some instances. Yada yada yada. All of this explains why poor people also get access to lawyers. It's not just the rich folks. Cool. Moving on to the last facet then of the trial process, which is judges. So there is an argument to be made on both sides. Some people say judges are biased towards conservative thoughts. Some people say judges are liberal. There are reasons to explain both these things. And the argument actually is quite simple. The reason as to why judges are often conservative is because they have, like, it requires a lot of money and privilege to become a judge because legal education is expensive. Two, to become or to be elevated as a judge, you often need a lot of connections, which comes from familial backing. So you're obviously a person with a lot of privilege. The implication of this is that you have lived your life in, like, you're firstly old, which means you are unlikely to be progressive. But second, you have been insulated from harm. Thus, you're not as empathetic to people who are in marginalized communities because you've always lived a life of luxury. All of these are reasons to explain why a vast majority of judges are A, old white men, but B, do not have a lot of empathy towards marginalized groups. Thus, they're often more on the conservative side. The flip side of this is also true. There are also multiple reasons to explain why judges are more often than not liberal. The first reason is that yes, it's true that they're rich, which is why they often go to the most elite universities. Thus, most elite universities by design are left leaning in their social thought patterns and education and the way that it gets passed down. So they often have a lot of liberal thoughts. But secondly, they receive ethics training, which tells them to be egalitarian. Third, the judiciary places a premium on values like equality before the law and ensuring that you have like equal treatment under the law and you don't have discriminatory episodes, which is why judges place a premium on values like egalitarianism, treating people the same way. Often, judges are tasked with keeping a check on populist power. Thus, all of these reasons incentivize them to be very progressive and liberal, which is why most judiciaries are actually quite liberal. So you can make both cases. You can explain why judges are biased towards the right. You can also explain why judges are biased towards the left with both these parallel reasonings. The second thing is, what are the incentives of judges? The incentives are often, firstly, ensuring that they leave a legacy behind by being a good judge, which is by passing fair judgments. But two, they often want professional validation from fellow judges. That is why they all often act as a check and balance mechanism against each other. But the third and the last thing is, what are the checks and balances on judges? The first is that they can be removed by, like, they can be removed by a presidential clause, so they're not completely immune. But second, they're also often under massive media scrutiny. So an example for this could be like the Chief Justice of India and what he just said recently. Like he called people and young people, especially cockroaches, and there was like massive media uproar on it. And then he had to apologize like the very next day. So this shows you that there is massive scrutiny on to judges, thus they can't get away by saying anything that they want, which is why they often have to self-regulate and self-censor when they say controversial things. So the explanation for this is that judges can be proven to be both liberal and conservative depending on circumstances. Their incentives are a good legacy, but B, professional reputation. And the third is that there are massive checks and balances against arbitrary power on judges. Yes, Nahush. I can't hear you if you're saying something.
Oh yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, about the backlash part, like repercussions that judges can face. Obviously, like the law will try to ensure that judges are to some extent immune from these sort of like backlashes, right? Because you can't expect that like influence their proceedings and stuff like that. And especially in like India, for example, judges can just like resign and still get all the benefits that they do get, like from the law, like pensions and stuff like that. So how effective are these measures actually in like trying to check bias?
All of this is true, and there have been massive complaints about judges not being accountable enough because they just have a lot of immunity. But this does work to some extent because we discussed that one of their incentives is uh, leaving behind a reputable legacy. So often, when they get massive media backlash and they get villainized in society, this is something that they don't want. So it's just quite evident that Justice Suryakant is visibly perturbed by his media reputation right now because he cares about his social capital and perception. So this did act as a self-censoring mechanism because sure, the law won't punish the judge, but the judge cares about his own reputation, which is why he self-corrects. So the social capital incentive often changes based on media scrutiny. So it works on one level. But secondly, sure, judges can resign and still get benefits, but they lose their ability to be in power and pass judgments. So that's some mitigation at least. So you're bang on correct that judges are quite immune in a country like India. But it's not to say that no check and balance exists. There is scrutiny, and these judges care about their image, which is why they often self correct and they don't act out in the worst of ways. But also, judges often have to pass decisions in panels. So one judge can't unilaterally dictate the law. They're often balanced out by a panel of judges that ensures that the interpretation of the Constitution is in tandem with democratic values. Thus, they can't have an absolute abuse of power, so to say. And also, as I said, they can be removed by virtue of parliamentarian process. So at best, they lose their value or they lose their ability to be a judge, which is all a check and balance that you can have on the judiciary. Uh, cool. Let's just move to the last part then, or the third part rather. And this after this, we'll just break down a motion and then we'll call the workshop a show. This is very simple. Like the third and the fourth part is very simple. Prison. So we have discussed effectively how the trial process works, which is evidence gathering, why lawyers are needed, why they help poor people, and what judges are. We've also discussed these principles. So let's just talk about prison. The first question is, why are prisons bad? Very intuitive question. Can somebody raise their hands? Why is it bad to live in prisons? Yes, Avni.
I think because prisons are overcrowded, you are probably a less violent criminal is posted with a violent criminal, and so again they become apathetic, or like the conditions are such that it desensitizes them even further. Also, bad sanitary conditions, you get bad food, bad sanitary conditions, etc. Yes.
The first reason is just that they're often very overcrowded, and the money that you have in a specific prison is obviously finite. So if you have more people and the same amount of money, the services that you extend onto each prisoner is obviously worse off, which looks like less cleanliness, less quality food. All of this just perpetuates cycle of violence because money and facilities are zero sum. Thus, these prisoners start fighting amongst each other as a consequence of this. What are other reasons as to why prisons are bad, Jyoti?
They take away your basic freedom of life. You don't have the freedom to move. You don't have the freedom to do anything as you wish. You have to, live under certain rules and conditions. You're always under surveillance. So it takes away the basic freedom of life.
Strips your freedom, yes. Parmarth?
So the exposure in jails are very bad, even if you are a minor criminal or a person who does not have a larger bad intent. But at large, if you are going to live in those environments, you are probably going to get hurted a lot, or you're also going to become more criminals like that, because gangs operate in these situations a lot. Bad
Oh,
exposure in general in jail.
that's a pretty good reason, which is often there are massive criminal networks in prison. And these people force you to resort to lives of crime again, in fact, in worse ways. And the reason that these criminal networks exist is often that you have to opt into them because you need to protect yourself. Like if you don't opt into these gangs in the prison, they often beat you. And in order for you to protect yourself from the other gang, you need to be part of some gang. Thus, you end up joining one criminal network. But you also join these networks because there is massive corruption in prisons. Since these prisons are underpaid, the low level guards in these prisons often are entrenched with the criminal networks. So they help you do things like drug peddling or whatever crime you do within these networks in the prison. Uh, any other reason beyond these three things? Something that is unique
Yeah,
from
like
this?
Can I talk?
beyond this, I think.
Uh, Ansh.
Yeah, prisons are just extremely costly because you're spending for expenses of by tax-paying dollars for people eating and just staying in a place the whole time. And there's so many people, so it's just a drain of money on the state.
Dev.
Uh, can you correct me? But I read some fact that the deepest flaws of one of the political system one talk that it is predominantly punishes individual who have not been yet convinced of any crime. So I was reading that there are many of the population who are in the prison and are under trials. So
True, true. Yeah, that's actually a different subject matter, but you're right on that. There are multiple people who still have convictions going on but are still in jail. Uh, we'll talk about that later. But can somebody give me other reasons for why prisons are bad beyond all of
Yeah.
this? Like some
Yeah.
new reason.
Beyond the fact that the prison life sucks in itself, I guess, I think one of the major problems of prison is the life that criminals will face after you get released. For example, now you are socially shunned, like your social capital reduces drastically. Now you are like in the neighborhood that you go, you'll probably not be invited to people's homes. You'll be seen with suspicion. Your general quality of life, the, freedom you enjoy in the society, even when you are outside, is low because
Yeah,
people tend to not trust you. Secondly, your since you were in prison, you were not earning and everything. Your economic condition has worsened, which means that your life in general sucks now. Like you're probably your health has deteriorated within prison because you do not get enough food and everything. And moreover, you don't have any money. Your social capital has reduced, which reduces your general quality of life. Probably your family has also shunned you, which means that you might go into a mental spiral as well because now you're enclosed within those walls. Probably your family is not supporting you or something, then you might have a mental breakdown.
yeah,
So on um, social,
makes sense.
economical, mental, as well as physical levels, you are suffering at all levels.
All correct. This was actually the fourth part, which is life after prison. But that's right. All of this is true. So if I had to sum this up, Prisons are bad because of multiple reasons. First, overcrowding is bad because you just get worse outputs for these people because money is finite. Second, you have violence from other inmates but guards. Third, you often have to resort to lives of more crime because there are criminal networks operating within jails, and you have to compulsorily opt into them because you have to self-protect. If you don't join a gang, the other gang beats you up. So in order to protect yourself, you need to join these gangs. But also, prisons are just very expensive for the taxpayer. And the last thing is, in prisons, you don't have a lot of education or work opportunities per se. Thus, it's unclear what you do after. This brings me to the final part. Oh, sorry. Before life after prison, there is another question, which is, why is it hard to improve prisons if it's so bad? Why does the state not just fix this?
Like
Uh,
the amount of money and resources that the state has itself is limited. So probably that, you know,
Two, money is limited. One reason. Uh,
moreover, there might be more people in the prison. So like even if you do have the money, that's just going to get divided among everyone who is present. So
Correct. Dave. Okay. Uh, Jyoti.
The reason why it is hard to improve them is because whatever limited funds the government or the state has, they already allocated to other things like infrastructure. So they have other priorities. And prison is not a top priority for most of the states. Hence, prison improvement comes way in the lower rank. So even if there is some amount of improvement, it's close to negligible.
Excellent. I'll just complete this reason though. It's right that it's not a priority for the state, but the reason that it's not a priority is because prisons are not a voting issue. Oftentimes, the priority for the state is dictated based on what is a hot voting issue. So that's why they care so much about schools, education, or religion, because it's a hot voting issue. Prisons are not. Nobody cares about prisons because prisons don't form a voting bloc. Since it's not a voting issue, there is no political will to transform or reform them. This is the first
Uh,
reason.
if I could add something to it.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's sometimes very strong victim lobbying group that exists that doesn't let you do all of these things. And these people are often very vocal about their issues, their mental trauma, the problem they have gone through. Thus, they can uniquely like take people's attention away from that as well.
Yes, that's very accurate. There are massive victim lobbying movements, NGOs, and media that proactively villainize criminals, and often the perception of criminals is that they're evil people. All of this reduces the state's political incentive to actually reform prisons because there are other forces that tell the state that these people are bad and you ought not help them. So there are often counterbalancing forces that reduce this already non-existing political will. Another reason which you all of you said before was is just that the state's resources are finite and it has to prioritize other things like education, healthcare, etc. But also another pertinent reason is just that they don't have enough information. Because in order for you to figure out what to fix in the prison system, you need to take inputs from prisoners. You need to know what part of their life is wrong. You need to have data sets that tell you what people are likely to recidivize, what people are likely to be rehabilitated. The state just doesn't invest enough money into collecting all this data. So they don't even have the information needed for them to do any reformation. All these reasons cumulatively explain one, why prisons are bad, but two, why it's so hard to improve them because not a voting issue, no political will. Victims lobby against prisoners. There is a perception of criminals as being evil, resources are finite, and the state doesn't have enough information. All of this explains why prisoners, or rather prisons, do not improve with time. Going on to the last thing then, which is life after prison, which is something that I think Dikshita was speaking about earlier. What are the obstacles to reintegration? And I think these are pretty simple, which is one, it's hard to find a job. Like there is just massive social stigma attached with you. People think you're still a criminal and things like this. Uh, yeah, Rushil.
uh, you lose like 10 to 15 years of time to develop soft skills or software degree.
Very good. Your skills or anything that you had beforehand gets outdated because there's a massive interim window between when you were arrested and when you come out. So often skills that you did have are either things you have lost now, or B are, even if you retain them, they're outdated because those are not the same skills the job market wants right now. Jyoti?
You lose your social capital, be it in your neighborhood. So people will basically, for an example, in Indian neighborhoods, aunties will basically tell their kids, if you do this, you will also become like that uncle. So don't do this. So basically, you will lose a reputation and become a villain in your neighborhood.
True. As funny as that sounds, that's actually true. You do lose a lot of your peer networks because of the stigma attached. So oftentimes when you do come out of prison, other people are like, hell nah, we ain't associating with this person at all, and things like that. So any familial or neighborhood support that you could have had are things that you lose because of the stigma. But also you just lose your uh, direct family actually, because oftentimes you become a burden on these people while you're in prison. So they often start dissociating themselves with you. But two, there is so much time fracture between you being in prison and them being outside that this time fracture leads to your relationships dissolving, and they don't necessarily care about you once you come out. So you lose your family, your emotional support, and you also lose other social peer networks. Your skills are you can't find a job. It's just bad after you come out of prison. Yes, Ansh, then Rushan.
You're conditioned to a different life environment, so you've been conforming to like the gang leaders, etc. in prison, while you come outside, you're supposed to follow this new societal rules, which are just unfamiliar in the first place.
Yes, massive dissonance between what you were subject to in prison versus what's expected out of you after. So this leaves you utterly confused. Rushan?
State has no incentive to create employment schemes.
Precisely. State doesn't care. You're still not a voting issue. You're just a random person who came out of prison. Nahush?
Yeah, the like amount of proof you need to prove to society that you are like a normal, like rational person now is disproportionately like larger than the amount required to prove to society that you are a bad person. So it's like very hard for these people to come back and.
True. That's actually good. The threshold for you to prove that you are not yet a criminal or you're not still a criminal is quite high because people on face value perceive you to be a criminal. So you just have to do a lot more work in proving your innocence, which is net bad. Uh, Jyoti?
So, like when you're in prison environment, you develop a sense of psychological, like you do develop a lot of psychological maybe issues, like you're isolated all the time, you're separate from life. So when you come back into society, it takes time for you to even psychologically adapt to the environment and, accept the fact that world has changed in the past 10 to 15 years.
True. It's just difficult to rationalize the time lag that exists. But I think a more hard reason is just loss of capital, which is since it's true that prison doesn't give you any hard skills and you don't get a job. Also, the stuff that you do in prison doesn't pay you as much because, well, prisons are underfunded and no political incentive to pay you. Thus, you often have little to no money when you come out. This, coupled with the fact that you don't have a job, just makes your condition very bad. All of this, like, there are several other reasons. But the point of this is just to say that A, prisons are bad. Two, they can't be changed because no political will. And third, life after prison massively sucks for all these reasons. This is the whole pipeline of the criminal justice system. So I'll just sum it up chronologically and then I'll show you the motion that I had for you. Uh, so the first thing that we discussed was purpose, pure utility. We discussed multiple things under this: jailing people, deterring people, why it works, why it doesn't work, rehabilitating people, why do we need to rehab them, why do we need to give victims closure. Uh, then we discussed principles, all of which are actually a counterbalance against absolute utility. And we discussed why they're important because they place a premium on human dignity. Then we discussed the integrate process of the CJS, which is first trial, which involves evidence gathering, which is often linked with confirmation bias. Second, we discussed the need for lawyers and how they work and why they have incentives to help poor people. Then we discussed judges, why it can be justified for them to both be conservative by design and also liberal. Like you can give reasons for why both of that is true. Then what the incentives of judges are. And lastly, what are the checks and balances on a judge to evade and prevent absolute abuse of power. Then we discussed prisons. Why are they bad? Why is it hard to improve them? And why life after prison absolutely sucks. Is all of this completely clear? to everyone. Any questions on anything that we've discussed up until this point? Is it clear? Can I get like a verbal confirmation?
Yes,
Yes.
of course, it's clear.
Okay, excellent. Then we have pretty much succeeded in the goal for today's workshop. Because if you know all the things that we've discussed up until this point in the workshop, then you have a very solid ground level understanding of how the CGS works. And all of this is, I would say, quite sufficient to help you build a robust case in any debate whatsoever. Because these are often the things that you will find underlying in motions. And knowing this is pretty much help enough. The only thing that we are left with doing then, and then we'll wrap up the workshop, is to actually see the applicability of this knowledge into real time motions. So, what I'll do is I'll give you guys a motion. I'll give you some, let's say, 6 to 7 minutes to read it and think of a potential gov case, let's say. Let's just take one side for this matter. So, this is the motion. You can read it on screen right now. This is a motion that I did recently in SLS 2026. So if anybody spoke in that tournament, you would have seen this motion before. But I think this is a very good motion because it makes use of all the concepts or most of the concepts that we studied in today's workshop. If you have any doubts on the motion, you can ask me right now. I'll clarify it. And then just think of a gov claim that you can make on this motion. And then we'll briefly discuss this. So I'll just explain the motion for anybody who has any doubt. Uh, Decarceration targets refers to the measurable goals that individual states set for themselves to reduce their incarcerated populations within a certain time frame, which is you have a certain goal. You want to take X number of people out of prison because incarcerated population basically means the population that is in jail. So the motion is in states with high levels of incarceration, this house would make federal funding for state prisons conditional upon achieving decarceration targets. This is the motion, as simple as it gets. Any doubts on the motion or what it
Is
means?
there a difference between federal funding and regular funding?
Yes, effectively, most state prisons get a large chunk of their funding from the center, which is through a federal pipeline. So they have some budget themselves, but most of their money comes through the federal channel. So this funding is very important to these prisons, basically.
This refers to a central government funding individual states, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay. I'll just mute myself for 5 minutes then, and then we can discuss the gov case. Try to think of all the principles and practical pipeline of the CJs that we discussed, and you'll actually find very good arguments to make. Okay, are we good to discuss, or do you folks need more time?
I think we can begin.
Cool. Okay. So does anyone have an idea for a solid argument that they can run on government in this motion based on everything we've discussed?
To support the Gov case, the very obvious point would be that a federal funding is important because it acts like a motivator for these prisons to actually take the steps into consideration, and they will actually reach their targets.
Yes, that's correct. Avni?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like for developing a political will, so states would want their own funds to go elsewhere or be utilized better, and so they would want more federal funding to maintain prisons, which will actually solve this problem of political will.
True. Rushil?
A high level of incarceration means a majority of your population is unproductive towards the economy. As the central state, your main target is probably to A, reduce incarceration rates, B, improve the economy. By removing people from prison, if you get them employed, they will obviously, you can tax them, earn money off them, etc. So you want to, since you have a limited amount of funding as the central government, you want to prioritize the states which are able to get people out of prison the fastest, because those are the people who are likely going to join the economy.
True. All of this is correct. But the way in which you make use of the specific knowledge discussed today is that you first explain a problem that this policy is solving. So the way to do it is just explain that mass incarceration is actually a very self-perpetuating cycle. Like if there are high levels of incarceration, presumably there are high levels of crime in this area. So mass incarceration is quite self-perpetuating, like it happens on its own. And there is, sorry, and there is nothing that keeps this in check. This sentence basically means that there are multiple pressures on the state to keep making arrests, which is the things we discussed: victim lobbies, NGOs, media. All of this forces the state to make a lot of arrests. So there is nothing that is telling these prisons to reduce the number of people in jail. It's only when you attach a conditionality of federal funding do these prisons realize that they will be in for a doom if they don't decarcerate. So the first explanation is just what Nirbhay and Avni said, which is this forces state prisons to decarcerate. Because without this policy, without making funding conditional, there is absolutely no incentive for them to decarcerate. Because there are multiple other forces that force them to make more and more arrests. So the first thing that this is doing is forcing state prisons to decarcerate because they don't want to lose money. Another thing that you can weaponize in this debate is oftentimes the ways in which these arrests happen. Because if it's a area with high level of incarceration, presumably a lot of arrests are happening. That also means that there is racial bias in these arrests. So the illustration for this is that for every white man arrested, there are five black men arrested. But without this conditionality, you never have a research on what people are being arrested, why are they being arrested, how do we decarcerate them. That conversation only kicks in when there is a fund conditionality. So you basically have massive racial bias perpetuating these arrests. And this conditionality actually acts as a recourse mechanism wherein the prison reads the files of people who have been arrested. So black people who have been arrested for very petty crimes just because they were black are now left out or are allowed to be released because the research on them happens, their files are checked, and then the prison realizes that they were actually arrested on unjust grounds just because they were black, just out of racism. So these people are uniquely left out when there is conditionality on the funding. When there is no conditionality, these people are still arrested easily because of racism. So this is a counterbalance against racial acts as well. And the reason for this is just that the state is now incentivized to let as many people go as possible. What's another reason?
In a world where there is so much arrests happening, this system can slowly start decriminalizing lower and petty crimes. For example, shoplifting can no longer require arrests being happening. So it like reduces the stress on the entire jailing facility, saves money.
True that. I mean, this is quite flippant because a good op team can just come and say that decriminalizing petty crimes is very bad because it takes away any deterrence that was remaining. So this just encourages a lot of petty crimes.
But I think when Rushil mentioned that economy is collapsing because a lot of the population is inside of the jail and not being economically supporting, like they're not supporting the nation anymore. So it can help a nation in that situation.
Yeah, but the assumption there is if you decriminalize petty crimes, these people become productive. What if they keep doing more petty crimes? Because it's now not criminal to do it. So that looks like more people doing shoplifting and not like more people doing productive jobs
I
because
think
you're
they
not
can
even
be
putting the money.
penalized regardless. You can have fines, you can have community service. You don't have to put them in a jail necessarily. So that can happen.
Fair. That's actually a good argument, which is you can invest in alternative channels of, let's say, rehab or community education as opposed to criminalizing petty crimes. What else? Nahush, yes.
Can we say that the jails would be better for the remaining of the people once they are like they're out of the jails? Because facilities can only improve if there's not overpopulation inside the jail.
Correct. So if you go back to the problems that we discussed as to why prisons are bad, the first thing was overcrowding. So obviously, if you get rid of overcrowding by doing more decarceration, you make sanitary conditions better off because the money remains the same, but the number of people there like reduce. So you can utilize more money per person. Thus, you have things like better food, better sanitation, more money to hire competent guards, more investment in healthcare facilities, psychological counseling. Like any money left with less people in prison is net good because it ensures that the condition of life that remaining people in prison have is far better. That's a very good claim. What else?
I had a point related to that. Just the fact that this also creates an active incentive for these, like for example, guards or like staff in prison facilities to monitor these people better, because if they, engage in activities like helping these prisoners peddle drugs or something inside this prisons and stuff like that, that would not lead to decarceration, which means that they would not get access to that higher funding, which would give them more higher wages and stuff like that.
True, that's actually correct. So these guards and their salaries is often contingent on federal funding. So they want to ensure that the prisoners don't participate in gang networks or activities like that, because then they won't be decarcerated, and then the guard's own salary will be cut off. Thus, it's a selfish incentive for the guard to act in good ways towards the prisoner, or basically to help the prisoner reform and actually get out legitimately. True. Uh, I think another thing that you can say is just that over incarceration is bad for so many reasons. Like the flip of the fifth point, which is you can give several reasons for why having a lot of people in jail is bad. And then you can explain if you manage to kick out more people or let out more people who were petty criminals or were wrongly arrested because of racial reasons, then jails will just be net better off. If opposition says that this can't be done realistically, if you read the motion, it makes use of the word, or it says that individual states set themselves. So the decarceration targets are set by the individual state itself. Thus, it has all the incentives to set realistic goals. If opposition, let's say, said that these goals will be unrealistic in nature and things like that, you can always say that this is not coercion by the federation because the state will obviously set its own goals and it knows its capacity to decarcerate. Thus, the goals won't be like we will kick out 60% of the prison population. Obviously, it will be more realistic in nature. Thus, this is not coercive. This is cooperative with the federation. Thus, it will happen in a good way. So up until this point, we actually have a very strong case ready, which is without this contingency of funding or conditionality, there are massive incentives to keep incarcerating because multiple lobby groups tell you to jail more people. But also, there is no political incentive for politicians to decarcerate. This conditionality forces state prisons to decarcerate. One, reduces racial bias. Two, might lead to the decriminalization of petty crimes, which is good because you can invest money in alternative channels of making these people economically productive, which is very good for the state. But then the condition for people who are left in jails will be far, far better. And you can just add an impact, which is that then rehab for these prisoners becomes far more likely who are left behind because you have far more money. So these people are likely also to become productive elements of society when they reintegrate back after serving their jail term because their quality of life in prison became tenfold better when these people decarcerated. And also several reasons as to why over incarceration is bad. Life in prison sucks, violence, perpetuating cycles of crime and things like that. And then lastly is explaining why this will be done in good ways. This is pretty much a tight government case in isolation. Did you need to do anything for this beyond the things that we studied in theory?
No.
So the point of this is just to say that if you know the core explanation for the pipeline of the criminal justice system very well, you can pretty much make any case for any motion which concerns criminal justice in abstract. Be it a technology motion, be it a motion about incarceration or decarceration, be it a motion about AI judges or things like that. You can often cook up a case for anything based on the things that you've studied. Rushil, you had anything to add?
I just had a question. On op, can you argue why this doesn't have, if states are allowed to set it for themselves, if state has an incentive to not decarcerate people, then it just makes the goal very low and the change isn't meaningful?
So I think a more strategic op argument is that first, politicians, regardless of this funding, never have an incentive to decarcerate people because it's literally political suicide. Like the meaning of decarcerating people is literally letting people who are in prison walk free. And this is something that causes massive civilian paranoia. So even if it cuts funding, politicians never want to do this because it's literal political suicide for you to let prisoners walk free. The converse of this can also be argued that politicians often, for getting more funding, will overpromise their decarceration rates. So they will promise decarceration rates that can't be achieved, which means that their funding will be cut. And this will be even worse for the existing prisoners because same number of people there, but even less money to fund their healthcare, to fund their food, to fund their education. So violence becomes tenfold worse in the prison. So the ideal op argument is just one, politicians will never do decarceration because political suicide, or two, they will promise so much decarceration that they will never be able to meet their goal and funding will get cut, thus making the condition of existing prisoners far worse. So these are the two things that op can argue. Uh, you can also just argue that investing this money instead of conditionality on like drug courts or mental health facilities is just far better. But also, an op argument is that this creates a numerical metric for decarceration. So often you don't do a qualitative check on who you are releasing, but you just want to release numbers quick. So you often end up releasing people who are the most convenient to release. And these people don't reform themselves, but often become more recidivist after getting out because they think that there are no consequences to their crimes. They're not being incarcerated. Thus, they will commit more crimes and their families will also commit more crimes. So you just have way more micro crimes happening on scale if these people get out. Like all of these are things that op can argue, I would say. So the answer to your question is that politicians just don't have the will to do this regardless of the motion. Is the smartest op frame to run.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Um, Aryan, anything to say? Can't hear you if you're saying something.
Am I audible?
Yeah, finally, yes.
Okay.
So like specifically like if high amount of incarceration probably means there's a like specifically targeting incarceration means like less trust in minority towards the state, which means that like if a state has electoral incentives, they will probably go ahead and like in terms of petty crimes and go ahead and like reincarcerate these people and like then let them go like if they have petty crimes or like necessarily you can't necessarily prove that they have committed crime, probably could increase the amount of trust minority probably will have, probably lead to better amount of votes or like kind of in terms of voter like electoral incentive. Can you like probably run this on that?
Uh, can, but I think it's very beatable because the first response to this is just that politicians have populist tendencies. They often don't care about minorities or vulnerable groups because those people don't form a majoritarian vote bloc. So they can often do things like gerrymandering and shift electoral lines to ensure that every state is majority. Like the ratio between the majority and the minority community is 60-40 always. Thus, the state can always conveniently get away by never pandering to the minority. But also, there is no electoral incentive of releasing petty criminals because they're still criminals and they were in prison. So there is mass paranoia when you allow 100,000 people to walk out of your state prison just because you want to meet a decarceration goal. So the mass paranoia is like shopkeepers shutting down their business because they think that 10,000 shoplifters are now walking scotch free because the state allowed them to go. This leads to people not doing business, but this leads to people being antagonistic towards the state by viewing them as pro criminal. Thus, thus the state doesn't want to lose their majoritarian commercial vote block, is the argument. So sure you can run this, but I just think it's very easy to respond to as a good opposition. So I wouldn't call it a strategic argument per se.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So this like the point of me showing you this motion was just to show you that if you know the stuff that we discussed in today's workshop, you can cook up a very tight case for any criminal justice motion. And the goal of this workshop was just to take away your fear of not knowing enough. Because I think if you know the stuff we discussed today, it's quite solid enough of a ground for you to build any case from ground up. So just quickly summarizing everything in 1 minute. We discussed purpose, utility, incarceration, deterrence, rehab, victim closure, discussed the importance of everything. Then we discussed principles which go against utility, but they're important because they place a premium on human dignity. We discussed the trial process, evidence gathering, lawyers, why they help poor people, judges, how do you prove whether they're right wing, left wing, what are the incentives, how do you check and balance them, uh, prison, why are they bad, why is it hard to improve them, what does life after prison look like, and why is it terrible. Then we applied all of this knowledge to a specific motion by building a gov case, which explains what the incentive of politicians are and why those incentives shift when you have conditionality of funding, but also by explaining why prisons get far better with less people in them and more funding, and also why over incarceration in any jail is very bad, and also why investing in other channels which are more productive is far better because it makes people productive members of society, which is something that wouldn't happen if they were stuck in jail, which are like networks of organized crime. All of this was just using mechanisms that we discussed previously in the session in the former part. So I just hope that all of this helps you build some confidence in dealing with criminal justice motions, so to say. Yep, that's it. That's pretty much the substantive part that I did want to cover in this session. I hope it did help to some extent. If there are any questions, you can shoot right now. If not, then you're free to leave. I think it's 10 already. We overshot our expected limit by a few minutes, but that's fine as long as you ended up learning. Any questions?
No, it was a great session. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, if there are no questions, then you are free to leave. Thank you again for joining, and I would sincerely request all of you to attend South India Pre-ABP, very good .com. They're putting in a lot of effort. Ensure you come to the comp, but also ensure you attend all the other subsequent workshops that will follow. I'm pretty sure that all of them will be equally helpful. Uh, thank you so much for sticking
Can
by.
I ask a question?
Yes,
Like,
Dev.
uh, like uh, you, we talked about rehabilitation, but it's not about criminal justice, but it's a little bit related to philosophy. I was reading someone, and one of the philosophers told that the society loves the word rehabilitation on paper, but its collectivity it rejects the idea because of ego. So due to the ego, it completely rejects the reality. So do you agree with that?
There is some truth in that. Like the idea is that, so we discussed victim closure, right? And the idea there was you are often evolutionarily wired to want revenge for a wrong that was committed onto you. So if somebody, let's say, murders a close one in your family, and you see that that person is not being treated harshly in prison, but rather is being given rehabilitation wherein the state is actually helping that person come back to normal life, that's often very frustrating for the victim of the violent crime because they think that this person is walking it off easy and the state is actually helping this person, whereas this person actually killed a love and like a very dear one of mine. So this creates massive feelings of agony and backlash towards the state by virtue of the victims. So when you say society doesn't like rehab, it's often victims of crime that don't like rehab because they feel like a person who deserved far worse treatment is getting to walk off quite conveniently. So sure, rehab has utility functions for society because this person is now ensured to not be a criminal again. But it's often very repulsive. The idea of rehab is very repulsive to specific victims because they think that they are being wronged. So the idea is true when it comes to the perception of victims towards their respective criminals because they think that this is unjust. But in terms of like broad macro society, I don't think that it's I don't think society is antagonistic towards rehab. Oftentimes most educated people understand that rehab is a function that helps reduce crime. So they don't hate it. They don't have strong feelings about it. It's often victims that hate it because it feels like injustice to them, is how I view the problem, honestly. Uh, I
Thank you
hope that
so
makes sense.
much. Thank you so much for helping, and I'm sorry if there was any background noise coming out.
No worries at all. Yeah, again, thanks all for sticking by. Sorry for taking up so much of your time. You can have dinner now. I will also take.
Shishi,
I
just
have
check
a
WhatsApp
question.
whenever it be possible, yeah?
Sorry.
Just check WhatsApp whenever it be possible.
Yeah, doing that right now.
Yeah. After, yeah,
Yeah,
works.
I have a question. Like, so in terms of like jails and like funding to jails, why is it like more often do you not see like jails essentially kind of trying to self-fund themselves by having criminals that are there to like do some sort of work that could possibly result in like earning money for the jail in itself for like funding purposes and all? Is it a human rights issue or like what in terms of it is?
Could you like repeat the question one more time?
Uh, so basically, why is it like in terms of prison fundings? Why do you not often see prisons that are like existing having do some kind of work like in terms of manufacturing or like any sort of work to essentially earn money to in a way to fund the prison services in itself? So like I kind like is it a human rights issue or like what doesn't is necessarily is the issue? Why doesn't like this thing done more often?
So I think the most intuitive response to this is that in order for you to generate money, you need money. Like you need money to make more money is the thesis of the answer. So the idea is in order for you to create infrastructure for prisoners to be productive, one, you need to have safe conditions for them because if there is perpetual violence by virtue of gang networks in prison, and these people are often fighting for their life, how do they become productive? Is the first question. But secondly, you need to have enough infrastructure for these people to be given jobs within the confines of the prison because you obviously can't let them walk outwards. You have to keep them in solitary confinement, but you give them work internal or inside the prison's walls. So you need to build a lot of infrastructure within the prison in order for these people to gain a lot of productive employment. That requires money. And the thesis is that most state prisons don't have funding. And the reason for that is politicians don't have a lot of will or political incentive to allocate money to these prisons because, as I said, they're not a voting bloc. So the problem is basically lack of money. Thus, because of the lack of money, you don't have infra. Thus, you don't have internal infrastructure enough to give enough jobs to people in prison. Thus, I don't think it's a human rights issue. It's rather a capacity issue. But the more proximate issue is that there is so much violence and corruption that even if you somehow magically had money, the money wouldn't trickle down to people being productive in prison because they're just fighting to save their life all the time. So I think that is the broad reason why people within prison are not super productive because they're often a fighting for their life, but two just don't have the necessary infrastructure because the politicians don't give them enough money. if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you,
Yeah,
by the way. Great session.
yeah, no worries. Okay, everyone, all the best.